So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our workshop this morning. So I hope you can hear me well. We are still waiting for some participants, but we will start the workshop in a few minutes. So just we will wait 1 or 2 minutes and then we will start the workshop this morning. So, good morning. Yes, I see your messages in the chat. So just in order to start, you can add your name, last name, and the name of your organization in the agenda not sharing document. And yeah. So let's start. So today's workshop is about French data management clusters, and it will last 2 hours, so from 10 to 12 this morning. We are very happy to welcome you as part of the Fair Impact Support Program for national level initiatives. So first, in order to give you a quick overview of how we are organizing the workshop this morning. So we'll start with first part with Gilles Mathieu from the French Ministry of Research, and he will present us the French data management clusters within the Recherche Data Gouv ecosystem. So you will give a presentation, and then we will have 10 minutes dedicated to questions. Following that first presentation, Dimitri Szabo from the National Institute of Research for Agriculture and Environment in France will present the lesson learned from INRAE about Recherche Data Gouv. So we will have all the time time for questions, and we will, at the end of the workshop, we'll have time for discussion between the speakers and the participants. So about the technical details, so just to let you know that the workshop is recorded and will be available on YouTube. If you have questions, if it's during the presentation, you can write them in the chat. And if it's during the time dedicated to questions, you can just raise your hand. And finally, please turn off your microphone during the presentation, just to avoid some noises that could disturb the presentation. So first, in order to introduce the workshop, I will give you a quick overview of the Fair Impact project. So it's an EU-funded project. It's from the call, just to be a bit detailed, from the call Horizon Infra 2021 EOSC 0105. So in other words, it's about expanding a fair solution in Europe, and it's in line with the Fair is Fair project. So the Fair Impact project is a coordination and support action program. It's a 10 million euros budget and it will last 36 months. So it started in June 2022. 28 partners and affiliate entities are part of the project, and they are all some of them are from different countries, so from 10 different EU member states, and there is the UK as well. So what is the overall objective of the Fair Impact project? So it's to realize a fair EOSC by supporting fair enabling practices across scientific communities and research outputs at all levels. So how the project aims to achieve this objective? First, by identifying current and emerging components for enabling fair. Secondly, to translate viable solutions that have been developed from one domain or research output and support their application in others. And finally, to define the support governance and coordination mechanisms required to ensure the continuous function of fair enabling practices in the EOSC. So this is the overall objective of the project. And as part of the project, there is a specific task dedicated to national initiatives. So it's a support program with lasting 8 months, and it aims to provide support to selected participants who have a national perimeter with their organization. So it means that we are organizing workshops on targeted topics in order to help them draft their fair implementation action plan. So here we see that we are helping them to define objectives, actions, milestones, roles and responsibilities, and to prioritize their actions in order to make an implementation action plan feasible. And so really the focus with these workshops, it's on methodology. So how we can achieve the objectives, what are the lessons learned from successful projects, and how they can learn from each other and from other organizations in order to draft their fair implementation action plan. So just to give you a brief overview of the planning, so we already had 4 workshops, so one on national plans in Germany and Romania, one on engaging researchers with fairness, one on open access publishing in fair action plans, and one on building fair skills at national level. So today is the 5th one, so French on French data management clusters. And just if you want to catch up with the previous workshops, they are all on YouTube, so it's always possible to have a look and just catch up if needed. So just to introduce today's topic. So today we are focusing on a French example, which is Recherche Data Gouv. And in the context of the support program for national level initiatives, Recherche Data Gouv is an example of a project and initiative who was from the national level, from the ministry, towards the data management team, towards the team at local level, the research team, and how there is a dialogue between, let's say, the national level and the local level in order to be as close as possible to the research team. So it's a network, but also different teams in order to make this ecosystem work. So this is just a broad overview, and thanks to Gilles Mathieu from the French Ministry of Research and Dimitri Szabo from the French National Research Institute for Agriculture and Environment, we'll have more detail about these initiatives. So Gilles, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Salome, and thank you for this introduction. Let me try and share my screen now. Okay. Can you all see my screen? Is that okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me clearly and well? So I hope it will last. My connection is for the moment quite good. So thanks again for the introduction. As Salome explained, in the next 25 minutes or so, I'm going to present you the global ecosystem, which is called Recherche Data Gouv, which is a national ecosystem, and with a specific focus on the data management clusters, but also presenting the whole spectrum and giving you an idea of how everything's organized, how it's been organized through time, which is something that will be completed later with Dimitri's presentation on a specific focus from INRAE point of view. So let's start with the very basics. How did everything start? So, well, at national level in France, there's been for quite some time a kind of national ambition to follow the general tendency in Europe and internationally to open all research products, so which if we can break down that, goes down to publications, data, and source codes, which is something that was set in the law, in the French law, in 2016, in a law which is called Loi pour une République numérique, so law for a numerical republic, digital republic, or whatever you call it, and which has been reinforced again and again for different plans for open science. So the global ID, which is set at national policy level, is that there is a will and an ambition to build a more cumulative, robust, and reproducible science that is accessible and transparent. So this is general for every object, so from publication, data, and source codes. But then if we break down and go to the data aspects, the main ambition was to make sure that the data, the research data, is designed to be natively reusable. So I won't explain you the FAIR principle. You're all in a project that's focused on FAIR, so you all know about it. But there's been some kind of realization at political level that this is very beneficial for every stakeholder in this scientific research chain, and especially the first beneficiary of an open, well-described data is the person who produced it. So it's been shown that the citation rate for publication with data that are shared and associated to the publication is much higher. So varies from 25% to 75% plus. So it's a significant amount of citation. So it's also clear that it's actually helped researchers and reduce digital footprint, saving time, making the data more reusable. Once again, you're all familiar with the FAIR principle and the impact. So it's just a realization at political level that this is something very important and that's been set in a kind of common objective in the French law. To build and top up on that, there's been the different plans for open science in France. And there's been the first one at some point, but then the second one, which is more recent, something like 2021, which has one amongst its objective, one clear objective on creating an ecosystem, which would be called Recherche Data Gouv, so Research Data Gov, to actually offer storage for open data and range of support service for researchers. The idea was that there would be something that it's sovereign, it's national, it's dedicated to the data that has to be open, so in the end of the life cycle of the data, and it comes with a set of services. So that's a very important statement because it's been put in a national plan, and the creation of this ecosystem has been supported politically from the beginning. Now, the commitments, if we break down in these different documents that have been declined from the second plan for open science, is that this platform, this Recherche Data Gouv platform, should be there to support the sharing and opening of research data, to promote the practices in data management, encourage the reuse of research data, and federate the already existing initiatives. These are the four axes in which things have been set up. And then it's been designed in a way from 2020 up to now through a study and prefiguration phase, which has been now transformed into global process that leads to a more stable ecosystem, which has evolved from 2020 to now, and is going to being now a kind of stable, long-term lasting ecosystem. So breaking down this, in the first years, there was a feasibility study for a generic repository. So like, what can we do? What are the best solution? How are other countries organized with regard to the national data services? What would be the best way to go forward? and what could be, how could our ambition be implementing? So that's why we designed different scenarios, and things have been set up in that phase. Now, 2021, there's been the starting of the putting things together, and the ecosystem itself has been officially opened in 2022 in July, so it's more than a year now, 1 year and a half, and it's fully operational. So what the study and prefiguration phases have shown is that the ecosystem should be one, I mean single, integrated, like on the principle that we're stronger together than having different silos and islands of open science. It's better to work together. With a focus and an emphasis on quality rather than quantity. The idea was not to fill up with a lot of data which are badly described and everything, but just make sure that everything that goes in there has a high quality level. And maybe the most important point of all, that support should be the central element of the system. There was at that time, and there still is, an acknowledgement of the fact that you can provide every kind of services you want on the technical level. If you don't have the accurate level of support on it, it's likely that it will not work as efficiently as you would like. So that's a very important point. So that were the starting points. So now let me dig into the ecosystem itself and describe how it's organized. So the aims of this ecosystem was to be a solution for any research team or any researcher that does not have any other solution to open or share the data. Important to say that if you have another solution, if researchers have another solution, the goal of the Recherche Data Gouv ecosystem is not to replace it. So there's been communities that have been there for a long time that had their repositories already. The idea was not to replace that, but to provide a solution where there was none. Make support central element of the system, so it's been set as one of the main aims of the ecosystem, and recognize, federate, and expand existing initiatives. So that was also something important. Open science didn't wait for us to extend in France and as in any other countries, and the idea was just to make sure that anything that existed could be federated or linked to, so that we could work together. So it's been sort of put in two big directions, which is first a network of support services close to the research community, and then a solution for depositing, publishing, and reporting data. So the first bit is actually to implement this aim of making support a central element of the system. So raising awareness, training, support the research team in opening their data. And then the second is to provide this solution, this technical solution, through a data platform, repository, registry, which is generic, multidisciplinary, and complementary to the existing thematic repository. This was also set as an alternative to publishing on commercial platform or on platforms that do not meet some different criteria in terms of trust, in terms of financial needs, and so on. And from the beginning, also with this ambition to be part of a wider landscape and to integrate the European landscape, so the EOSC landscape. Global view, this is the schema that Salome showed you at the beginning. So this is a synthetic view of the different bricks that form this ecosystem. And two of them are linked to the technical platform. They are the one at the bottom. I'm not sure if you see my pointer on the slides, but I'm showing there. So there's the data repository and the data registry. So mutualized repository for depositing and publishing data, and the registry brick, which is actually finding, harvesting data from external repository and exposing them. The four other ones are related to the support ecosystem, and they offer in support and training, which are the data management clusters, thematic reference centers, resource centers, and institutional reference centers. I will come back on all of this right now to explain what they are. Data management clusters are services which are on a geographical basis. So they are located on the different research centers across France that compose universities, national research bodies, and high schools, some hospitals, some different bodies, libraries, and so on. And they have a very geographically they are geographically organized with a local focus to provide a first line of expertise with research teams on all kind of issues to their local population. So we have 19 at the moment, 5 which are on the way to being labeled, and 14 which are labeled. This is this is a mechanism of labeling which comes to sort of showing and recognizing things which are organized and governed locally. So each of these 19 dots on the map is an independent structure organized by the local partners, universities, high schools, national research bodies, and so on. And there is a labeling at national level that comes and say, okay, this local organization answers a set of specific requirements that has been set up nationally and meets the nationally established criteria of quality to be recognized as a national data management cluster. This is a process that runs through calls that are run twice a year, and each year there are more coming. We've got an ongoing call at the moment, which is being evaluated. So we hope that by the end of the spring, we will have a few more to add on the map. And this is something that is quite federative because, as you can see, there are many people involved there, like more than 350 across all the different clusters, which accounts for more than 90 full-time equivalent. So, and many institutions involved. We count something like 80, most of them universities, but national organizations are there too, high schools are there too, and different, like some hospitals are there. So it's very varied and broad, and it ensures a first level of contact with the research team on the different sites. So that's the first aspect. Now, if we look at things through another axis, we have what we call thematic reference centers. They provide advanced expertise in a given scientific field, and it's a process which is still ongoing as well. So the landscape is not fully exhaustive at the moment. As you can see, we have 6 thematic reference centers now, which provide expertise in biological and life science, in earth science, in astronomy, in humanities, and biodiversity. So as you can see, it's not exhaustive. There are much more areas of research in France which is not yet covered by the thematic reference centers, but this is an ongoing process. And they started with those 6 because the 6 logos you can see here are the partners that lead with thematic reference centers, and all of them are recognized research infrastructures. Most of them have the French component of a wider infrastructure. If you look at IFB, for example, it's the French node for Elixir. So, well, you can see that these are infrastructures that already provided a wide range of services to their user before Recherche Data Gouv existed. So this is a concrete example of how to integrate and federate existing initiatives. The idea was not to reinvent the wheel and do again what those infrastructure were doing, but provide a frame to work together and to be a concrete interface between what is done in those infrastructures and what is done in Recherche Data Gouv nationally. So it builds bridges between the existing initiatives and the things that we've built on top of them. We've got resource centers as well, which on the similar example is recognizing groups, bodies, teams that were and are doing work on providing support to open science, and we're providing an integration and interface with the Recherche Data Gouv ecosystem. So we've got 4 of them, 3 which are which were pre-existing before Recherche Data Gouv and focus on different aspects of open science. These are the Training and E-Training Resource Center, which is led by Doranum, which is a body from CNRS in France, and already provides documentation, e-training resources for the community. And there's an interface with Recherche Data Gouv through this resource center. We've got OPIDOR, which is also led by CNRS and provide tools to accompany the data management at different levels. The main known of it is a tool for data management plan, but you also have tools for service catalogs and so on. There's a third one, which is on training the trainers, basically. So increasing skills within the data management clusters, and which is led by an existing network, which is called the EURFIST in France, which is basically a competence center on raising competences on the FAIR principles. And the fourth one was not pre-existing, but has been sort of created with Recherche Data Gouv and is a repository registry resource center. So that's about the development and maintenance and user support on the data registry and the data repository. So all of these modules work together to raise awareness, to raise competences, to improve the way that researchers publish and open their data, and is the heart of the human ecosystem, I would say, to accompany the users and to make the support the center of the system. Now, a quick word on the shared data repository. I won't take long on this because Dimitri will come back a bit more extensively in his talk later on. But the idea of this national data repository was that to provide a national service, a national offer, open to the entire research community in France, for research team to deposit, publish their data directly. I come back here on the opening and sharing. So it's the idea that this solution could accommodate both the wide opening, I mean, the open access, but also the sharing in case of data with specific restriction, which can be referenced with some restrictions there. So it accommodates for that. The idea was also to provide a common technical ground so that any national institution or university or research providing institution in France that needs to have its own institutional repository could benefit from this platform and have an institutional repository hosted there, which share the technical and software solution, but have their own way of administrating it. The idea was to, of course, by grouping, achieve a critical mass to gain an international dimension and be seen as a national data service. Again, I'm not entering into the details. I guess Dimitri will do that later. So just to clarify where Recherche Data Gouv is positioned with regards to the data lifecycle, I'm sorry, I just realized that the schema I put there is in French, but I guess you all know, you're all familiar with the whole cycle and the different steps of the planification, data collection, analysis, computation, and in 4 you have the curation, the depositing, publication in 6, and reusing in 7. Sorry for the French schema. So things are for us organized in tiers, so that if you get the first tier, that's the part which is mainly done within the the research laboratories in collaboration with the local data centers and computing power providers. So they're concerned the data which are being treated, analyzed, and this is something where we're not really positioned in the first stage. Where we start being and in providing an impact is when we come to curation, depositing, and publication, because they support bodies that I've shown earlier, provide a high level of support there in terms of curation. The depositing and publication is something that the national platform takes care of. And of course, the third tier, which is the reuse and then the reinjection of data outputs into the life cycle, is something which is in our focus as well through the exposition of citable data through this opening and sharing. So that said, this doesn't mean that there's nothing done on these first stages. Most of the data management cluster that act locally provide support and guidance for the first stages as well. But most of the time, they are reorienting their support to the proper body, the local support, the data, the data centers, the local institution that provides storage or computing for this data. And most of our services are oriented through the second and the third tier. Just a quick word to say that it's something which is really co-constructed and the governance is very collective. We've got many partners involved. The ministry, the French ministry, has put the impulse and is leading the ways to a common roadmap, but it's very collaborative in the sense that it's not just a kind of ministerial political platform. It's really something shared between the different partners. So quickly now, some lessons learned and key to success, and because yeah, it works. I mean, it's new. It's a new ecosystem, relatively new, but it works. But now, how does that work? Because I said there's a lot of diversity, but can diversity lead to entropy, and how do we overcome this? I've said that we had something like 80 different institutions involved. If we take the different data management clusters, the thematic reference centers, the institutional reference centers, resource centers, plus all the different groups that gravitate around that, that's more than 35 different groups that we have to link one with one another. If you make a matrix of it, that's more than 1,000 possible interaction, hundreds of people involved with different topics, something which is sometimes overlapping in terms of perimeter. It's not completely independent, of course. Yet we work with different entities which all have their own policies and sometimes different policies. So how do we make that work? Let me drive you through some examples to make it clearer. So as I said, the research community didn't wait for Recherche Data Gouv to be out to work on data management. So there's been a lot of existing initiatives, which I'm not relisting here, but you can see them on the slides. Most of them were already providing support. And the key idea was not to do everything from scratch once again, which can be a tendency sometimes. Let's say, yay, let's build something wonderful, and then, yeah, it doesn't work. But just to allow existing structures to work better together. So providing a board to have people communicate, share their expertise, share their roadmaps, and making sure that things can relate with one another is very an important key idea there. So reuse and integrate what's existing. The second example is the data management clusters network. When I've shown the map, you've seen that there's 19 of them all across the country, but they are independent in terms of governance, but they don't work independently. Within this cluster, you've got a diversity of profiles, you've got competencies, which are very complementary. And even if they are independent, they are very different as well. So you've got big sites with something like 15 institutions involved and dozens of people working on it. And you've got small sites with just one university, 3-4 people working, and still they provide the kind of or same level of services to their users. So to make that work together, there's been a network which has been set up to have people working together to share their competencies, to share their knowledge, to link people together, to ensure that the information circulates between the different clusters and that the IDs get to travel between the different clusters. It's been organized for different working groups, and it's still moving. There are some that's closed, some that open, depending on the subjects which is on the table at the moment. And the objective, of course, is to share, mutualize resources and produce new resources when needed. I won't go through all of them, but this is the list, so you can see that you've got Common Tools 1, you've got working on network of contacts, and so on. So these are really the people in the data management cluster that organize themselves to work on this. In here, there is no kind of political guidance or so. This is a really flat network. So the network is autonomous. As I said, it's coordinated by a committee of 3 people rotating, which are from the data management clusters themselves. So it's a really autonomous network. And it's also a way to facilitate the interaction with the rest of the ecosystem. It's easier to talk to a network organized than to talk to the 19 different clusters. So how does that work? Here are a few hints and what we can identify as 3 keys to success. As I said, it's important to bring together without standardizing too much and provide some kind of level of homogenization without impoverishing. So easy to say, difficult to do, but again, take into account what already exists, capitalize on what's in place and build on top of it and focus on what binds things together. Already a lot of different initiatives in place that do things and do them well. So the key there is just to focus on what glues things together. Avoid pyramids and say that silos. The more transversally you organize, the more it works. Build a network rather than a big pyramid with a top, and well, don't work too much top down, and promote the bottom up initiatives. Good ideas most of the time come from where things are done, so at the level of the research teams and the people that accompany them. Yet it has to be sort of coordinated and synchronized. So the network is there. So the bottom-up initiatives are discussed, organized, and put in place if deemed relevant. And the more transversally you're organized, again, the more acceptance you get from everyone, rather than a kind of big top-down strategy coming from a ministry that doesn't relate to the reality. And the last point is actually to do things rather than talking about what would be good to do, and be a demonstrator of efficiency. So start doing things, provide concrete and measurable service. It doesn't have to be big at the beginning. So start small, but start by something that works. Focused on common interests, so something that works and is expected by people, and then grow progressively through, of course, preferring agility than big monolithic projects, and evolve with the time. And that's what we thought were the best lessons learned from our point as key to success. So I think I'm done with the formal presentation now. Here are some links if you want to follow the news about Recherche Data Gouv. Yeah, and that's it. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, Gilles, for this great presentation, very clear. So thank you very much for that. So we have a few questions in the chat, but some of them found responses thanks to Dimitri. So just to repeat it, but Bessem asked if the feasibility study for 2020 and 2021 for generic repository is available openly. So Dimitri sent some links. I think the answer is okay. So we have another question from Jordi Podera. Is asking if the thematic reference centers are aligned to the domains of the science clusters. He added a link in the chat. So Gilles, do you have a...
At the moment, no. At the moment, no, because as I said, they were started by recognizing the national infrastructures that were already providing services. So that's why the landscape is at the moment not that exhaustive, but is just an example of starting where you are with something that works and put that forward and extend afterwards. But of course, the idea is to organize this a bit more exhaustively and to provide to enlarge the covering of the scientific disciplines. And of course, the focus of the science clusters is something that is worth looking into. Especially because of the links that we are building with projects like the Oscars project, which is led by CNRS, which is in France and which is also part of Recherche Data Gouv. So yeah, there is a tendency to move towards that, even if it's not in place yet. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Gilles. So yes, I think it's a good answer. So we had another question from Nasira Abbas from the CNRS. She asked for the link to the label call.
Yep.
And also Dimitri sent a link for...
Thank you, Dimitri.
So I think it's okay. We have another question from Baptiste Cecconi from the Observatoire de Paris. Is asking if the data management clusters open to all RDG users, so any institution, or only to their own institutional scope?
It's only, well, it depends on the clusters, because each one has its own organization, and their perimeter has to be described in the call that we make for labelization, and they describe who they serve. And most of the time, they group all the local partners from a given site, and their services are open to all the users. You can find some cases where it's not entirely the case, but most of them are open to all users in their geographical scope. So again, this data management cluster have a local focus. So the data management cluster from, I don't say Montpellier, for example, will take care of the users in the Montpellier area and not on the Marseille or Toulouse, which will be dealt by their own. So, but on the geographical site, it's open to all users most of the time.
Thanks, Gilles. So we have other questions in the chat. So I see one from Pinar Alper. Is the catalog indexing data shared for research by non-research organization, for instance, ministries?
So the catalog is still under development now, and we're exactly trying to answer that kind of questions at the moment. So who will we harvest and what data will be presented there? The idea is to expose data, research data, but there's no reason why we should exclude repositories provided by organizations which are not primarily research organization if there are research data in there. But then it's a question which is still under investigation now, but maybe Dimitri, you will talk a bit more about that later. I don't know if you read the catalog bit, but at the moment it's still quite open.
Thanks, Gilles. We have another question from Joanne, but I think she found her answer. So do you have plans to develop new thematic reference centers to fill the gaps between the existing clusters?
Yes. But yeah, I see, and I see the answer that how do you plan to go about this on a very pragmatic approach, I would say. So the first way we are extending this is through the biology life science thematic cluster, which is currently handled by the French Bioinformatics Institute, the IFB. And there is a kind of realization there that not all life science is covered by the bioinformatics field. So there's a will from them to collaborate with other biology and life science infrastructures to extend this. So we know that there's a momentum here, and we're helping in that to structure the life science thematic center so that it can cover other disciplines like bioinformatics. So it's really setting on the occasion that if we feel the momentum in a given discipline, then we will help and extend things. You see that the landscape is also moving. If you remember the organization of a different thematic reference center, you will see that there's the Data Terra one, which is on Earth Science, and there's a PNDB, which is on biodiversity. And now the PNDB, the biodiversity thing, has joined the Data Terra as one of the in the organization. So this means that we will shuffle the organization a bit at some point. And yeah, it's really on a pragmatic approach. What I want to say about this is there is no call for becoming a thematic reference center. It's much more about integrating how the landscape evolves and making things evolve in Recherche Data Gouv to reflect that.
Thank you, Gilles. So we have another question once again from Jordi Bodera. He's asking if the shared data repository can, this repository can be used by any research institution. So any research institution can deposit their data in it, or only, and is it only for open data or any data? Because he's adding that he's working in a synchrotron when they have a lot of data and their data center is getting small. So
yes, it's open to any research institution. The national collection is organized as a generic collection open to all, and institutional collections, institutional spaces for those institutions that have created one. So most of the national performing organizations have one, like the CNRS, the INRAE, INRAE, INSERM, and so on. They have their own collection. But if there is none, there is the generic collection. But it's not a big storage system for storing terabytes of unprocessed data or anything. It's really for open data. So data which is there to be shared or opened, linked to publications, and it's not meant to be a storage system for all kinds of data. So it doesn't answer the the use case of having terabytes of data to be sort of stored somewhere else because the local data center is getting small. That's an understandable problematic, but it's not the one addressed by Recherche Data Gouv. So we're really on the open data.
thanks, Gilles.
I see. Yeah, the answer. Why would terabytes of data not be open? Yeah, they can be opened, but then the storage of the terabytes of data is something that at the moment we don't have the capacity to store. Well, it depends on how many terabytes, but the system itself is not made and thought to handle that many data. What's possible, though, is to actually use the referencing aspect of it, which is actually publish the data by publishing the metadata in the system. And there is a possible interface with other systems storing the data themselves through API. It's a S3, if I'm not mistaken. Dimitri, you can correct me if I'm wrong there. That would allow to have the data published in Recherche Data Gouv, but stored in another system. So it's possible, of course. But then again, the Recherche Data Gouv system and the data repository is not here to provide terabytes and petabytes of data storage to that end. Okay.
Thanks. We have some more questions. Just one from Aneta Janowska. What about the organization at the level of respective universities? Are there data stewards in all of them to supervise, manage the opening processes?
It depends. It depends on the university and on the on who we look at. Now, just to mention, this is something which is not directly linked to Recherche Data Gouv, but there is a network of people in France that are dedicated to this research data management in the different bodies, which are called the data. It's not just data, it's data algorithm and source code administrators, and it's a role which is defined, which is national, and each institution can have their one, and they are linked in networks. So they are the people that can answer to advice, well, supervision and management of the opening process, and most of them are linked to the data management clusters. And there are plans to reinforce that link so that we can have in each university someone responsible for that. Of course, then it really depends on the university and on the stage they are in their own development and their own open science policy. So most of them have data stewards, some don't, but are in the process of getting one. So it's really on well, each establishment, its university is at its own stage there.
Thanks. We have another question from Johan Yeomans. What kind of funding do you provide to the data management clusters, thematic and reference centers, or resource centers?
Okay, so the data management cluster, there is with the call, there is the possibility to get a kind of a kickoff funding. The idea is not to fund them, but just to give kind of help the starting point, like by providing resources to organize different events or so, sometimes to provide some human resources at the start to kick off things. But one of the key requirements to become a data management cluster is that they should be financially independent from the beginning. So that's why they have their own governance. They are independent in the sense that the way they organize and finance is not depending from the ministry. Well, the same goes for thematic reference center or resource centers. Thematic reference centers at the moment are research infrastructure, which are nationally recognized, and some get some national funding through that. And their role within the Recherche Data Gouv is an interface role, which is not specifically funded. The same goes for resource centers. So the funding, most of the funding within Recherche Data Gouv goes to the technical platform and the organization of a technical platform, and the support has been built from the beginning to be self-sufficient.
Thanks. We have one last question from Baptiste Cicconi. Most French labs have multiple institutions. In French, it's tutelle. Are there guidelines to select institutional repositories for teams, for instance, CNRS or university?
At the moment, there are not global guidelines, but we've identified that it's something that should be, I mean, if not guideline, at least a common shared view between the different institutions. The view at the moment is that the institution that is funding the research for most of its part is the one where the data should go. Yet this is at the moment a false problem, I would say, because of the way the repository is implemented. A data set can be referenced in more than one collection. So if for a research unit, which is CNRS and university, wants to have their data set showing up in both spaces, then that's possible without having to store them twice. So that's one of the advantages as well of having all these institutional repositories hosted on the same instance. It's deposited once and it can be referenced many times. And it can be moved as well. So if at some point it's decided that it's been put in the wrong collection, it's possible just to, remove it from one collection and put it in the second one without breaking the persistent identifier or anything.
Gilles. So there's I think we are going to stop the session for questions now. And we are going to give the floor to Dimitri, and we will get back to the question and discussion after, just in order to make sure that we have time for all the presentation. So Dimitri, is for you now.
Thank you. Let me check the screen sharing. Yes. So hello everyone. I'm Dimitri Zabo, and after the global presentation and the focus on the data management cluster, I provide more of a return or feedbacks and lesson learned as a partner building the Recherche Data Gouv ecosystem. So just a spoiler and disclaimer. It was not only INRAE, there were other organizations, and it's actually one of the success factor of the project and the ecosystem, I think. But just to present mine and what I can talk about, here's a short presentation of INRAE, France's National Research Institute for Agriculture, Food and Environment. And as you see, it's a fairly large organization. The top of its 10 scientific research domains, actually, and involved in the Fair Impact project. So, to speak more now about Recherche Data Gouv, here's the global view again, first as a recap, hopefully to grasp all the modules of the ecosystem, but also as objectives that had to be set up for the ecosystem. I just, sadly for the question on the catalog, not included this module in this presentation because it was more about the feedback, but we can answer question on it even if it's still not finished, so we can't give all the lessons learned yet. So just to show that usually everything has a previous step, at least since the Big Bang. So there were already existing services or premises before Recherche Data Gouv at INRAE, and we're going to see the transition between existing and the finished modules of Recherche Data Gouv, even if some are not equivalent. We'll see that in a minute. And we'll start with the data repository, which is both the one I'm more involved in and the one where INRAE has the most participation, I think. So before the Recherche Data Gouv repository, it's the last bullet point of this slide, but the Recherche Data Gouv repository is actually technically based on the INRAE institutional repository, which opened in 2018. After a 2 years project, why am I specifying 2 years? Because it was already leveraging both the user needs and data champions from INRAE's communities. So just not out of nowhere. And as mentioned, it was only on a institutional focused, even if it was more open for specific cases or partner organizations, for example, for projects, etc. So what about the transition from this repository to Recherche Data Gouv, which is more the subject of the day? It's both the objectives and the challenges at the time. So there was an upscale of resources needing and actually more testing and having a architecture which is quite complex to have resilience with a disaster recovery plan to be adapted to a broader service. The migration of INRAE's data, both as a now collection from being the whole repository, but also other modification, for example, for specific data we had that would kind of misguide the user if it was still in the Recherche Data Gouv repository, or issues like DOI changes. Many configuration changes with example addition of metadata, a lot of vocabulary change in order to have a clearer interface and the whole way of working. And this is an important aspect because it's just we didn't sat and say, okay, it would be clearer like that. We had to discuss with other partners and the user needs to adapt to the other communities and be hopefully more clear. Of course, a new environment, which is the demonstration environment, which is using a different set of technologies and philosophy, and who will hopefully help us towards the migration to the new infrastructure, which is still planned, because you'll see it's both a running service and still a project, the whole Recherche Data Gouv ecosystem. So the key aspects learned from the transition. The first one is kind of still ongoing, but it was actually the most INRAE of the work packages that constituted the Recherche Data Gouv project for the platform part. And it's both helping to go fast, but it's always the same if you want to go further, go together. And so it would be an interesting point to discuss and share the knowledge and the governance on this specific technical aspect in the next steps of the Recherche Data Gouv ecosystem. So transparency is difficult, especially with this change of scale and the fact that it's INRAE. So the importance of both technical documentation and the choices we make, it's very time consuming and very critical aspect. Linked to the previous one, the fact that it's built on an existing service, there is some confusion between the previous service and what are the actual changes that have been made. Some people are still thinking INRAE is the repository when it's now just institutional collection and vocabulary changes. So linked with transparency, but important to have a lot of communication on the changes and with concrete explanations. And a last item, which is that the Recherche Data Gouv project worked also because there was funding from the ministry, but in the case of the repository, it helped opening it on a much larger parameter, for example, with the storage and etc. that had to be paid. But with the team remaining with a similar size, with more things to do, not only for opening, but now more use cases related to the national scale. And of course, even with the same roadmap as we would have some items, more expectations for the repository. So now we're going to move on the resource centers, which, if you remember, they're the one I didn't put tick, but tilde. So it's more or less corresponding, but a bit less than the repository, which is just the data INRAE repository became with improvement the Recherche Data Gouv repository. So the existing part at INRAE was the data support services. And again, this putting what was existing at INRAE is a way to highlight the transition between not just an institutional ecosystem, because of course those services were already speaking with other organization services. If you can see for DMPs, for example, the tool is developed and the main team is at CNRS, but to give the context of the transition, even in services that were directly involved in the Recherche Data Gouv project. So that said, the data support services playing a similar role that the current resource centers, where of course the data repository support team and teams responsible whether for the data repository or other open science aspects of trainings, which is a big part of the resource centers. So for example, the e-learning platform and the webinar trainings. Of course, there were much more services, and these institutional services still exist even in the case of the repository. Even if there's now the Recherche Data Gouv resource centers and people from the, for example, the repository support team, which is now the institutional collection support team, are also involved in the resource center because of the existing expertise and etc. So what did we learn in addition to this duality, which is both a blessing and a curse, because you have to split time, but on the other hand, you're in the closest position to build the interaction and avoid duplicating, whether being the training, the support, and even the time. Providing time for a national level is going to benefit more people. And one of the lessons learned exactly from this aspect of building a network of trainers and enlarge the services, etc., is that first it's key, but we weren't very surprised of that. But also it's very time-consuming process, and we had to accept that when it opened, it was still supported by the mainly the Recherche Data Gouv core project team, which is not only INRAE, but still the core team. And we are starting now to speed up on having more people involved in these services. And another important aspect, I mentioned the other services not directly related to Recherche Data Gouv. It's very important to still make a bridge between those services and the one in the national ecosystem. For example, with the e-learning platform, which might be used by the data management clusters too. So not only at an institutional level, in order to achieve what was expected and national ecosystem, not to duplicate things and having them benefit the larger community possible. So now off to the 3 other modules, which can be a bit confusing because we have the 3 kind of merged in institutional reference centers. And why is that? It's because, of course, INRAE is an institution. So what we have is now an institutional reference center, but it's as a national institute, we have various locations as shown in the first slide. And so these sites all over France have local clusters and address various thematics or scientific domains, even if it's more restricted than the whole ecosystem. People working in agriculture know that it's encompasses both biology, social sciences, and many disciplines and communities. So what was our previous existing context before Recherche Data Gouv? It was, which was actually quite recent because it started in 2021 to really start, even if the foreshadowing and first steps on existing networks existed before. It's the data ambassadors, and it's not the official name for the recording of today's video, which is named the référent données, le réseau des référents données in French, network. So as mentioned, it's an institutional network, but it already has this national scale and pluridisciplinary just due to what kind of research institute we are. It's, just to be precise, in the laboratory, some of them are a bit at a larger scale, but the objective is really to have them close to the research units, and they're actually directly in the research units. It has now a fairly high coverage, with not all research units or laboratories covered, but the majority of them, and more than 260 members, 263 actually. So still a consequent size even compared to the national network. And the main objective is to assist the researchers in their data management, but with the idea of it being a network to share all the information, the good practices, and etc. And finally, as mentioned, it's now one of the institutional reference centers. So what both has happened and did we learn from the transition? The first thing is that it's not either a duplicate or a separate level without interconnection, of course, and interconnection between networks are happening more on a local or personal level, with people from this network being already from, as Baptiste mentioned, research units that have several organizations. So well into that approach of being part of a data management cluster and serving at a local level several organizations. But with this positive aspect, the other aspect of the difficulty of integrating those kind of existing networks, which are not exactly with the same typology, because it's both with local integration but a national one, so it doesn't really fit just a data management cluster because it's not local. It's not only one thematic, so it's not a reference center. So there's an existing item for that in the ecosystem, but the interaction between this network and the other ones on how does it fit in the big ecosystem picture is still being defined, and is an important point to consider. And finally, which is kind of positive, and there's a will to expand this kind of approach of networks or networks. For people attending the RDA, we'll probably announce more on that, but very positive feedback on this interaction. So it kind of hopefully transpired a bit in the various items we covered, but to give more global success factors for the Recherche Data Gouv ecosystem, and from more my point of view on INRAE project. The first one, which doesn't have a dedicated slide because we focus the presentation on INRAE, is of course the implication of other partners from other organizations, and this both at the level of getting various IDs and more people working together, all this cooperation aspect, but also on one aspect we'll see later on with other causes, let's say, the legitimacy of having several organizations, and it doesn't feel like it's either coming from solely the ministry or it's the INRAE project or etc. So kind of related, I did put integrate support structures as a title, but it's more integrated all kinds of structures to provide a holistic approach with both the tools, but also the support teams and the support teams from various organizations, with the ideas of having them not merge, but forming a network, and also implicating the various domains, even if, as mentioned, it's still not covering all research. This, in my opinion, allows to adapt more fluently to specificities, because if you want to be on point for everyone, it's a very complicated thing, and you might end up with a system that works for no one. But the approach of using the already existing structures and having the support allows, I think, for more flexibilities regarding those aspects to cope for everyone's need. And an idea behind that, which I think has helped in the messaging of the ecosystem on the project, is that the idea is really to promote research data, good research data management, and the focus being sharing culture rather than just a tool. So it kind of goes with the holistic approach, but I think it's what can make it last, even if it's not with this same name, if it's not with the same tools, that open science comes from become just an idea and a project to become an actual practice, which is always something as practices that take time. And hopefully from communities from these networks to not just have them integrated separately, but working together and getting more and more of these practices, which hopefully becomes, and the one used are more and more best practices. So one of the important factor, which is kind of dual of the success, or the elements we learned were positive, is the importance of having both top-down and bottom-up. We tend, maybe because we get too much top-down, to focus a lot on the bottom-up aspect, which is super important for getting actual user needs and existing structures, and in the long term, especially not going astray from the needs, but also to have the official support. It's often said that it's a very French thing, but I think official support for endorsement and funding is a very important step, at least at the beginning, for every national initiative. And how is this aspect translated? I'll go shortly over that because Gilles already mentioned them. It's the being part of the Open Science Plan, the direct support from the ministry, without, for the bottom-up aspect, being the ministry's kind of document of you have to do that, and it's a list of bullet points. And which is one of the next step, the inscription as a research infrastructure, which provide legitimacy and as a for the technical modules. And as for the more bottom-up user need aspect, the previous survey, the existing expertise and repository that were used, not only in INRAE, but actually in the project, there were people involved on other repositories, and especially, I think, with the thematic reference centers, because it's the module that hasn't really changed from the existing. So I think I'm running out of time, so I'll go a bit faster for what's coming next. And one important aspect, just before going to the other one, which is already kind of being addressed, is the communication between the whole ecosystem and having it harmonized and more without, as Gilles mentioned, erasing differences and heterogeneity, because it's a strength and it's not something that's going to move. Not everyone has the same research and the same community, etc. But it's also to be mentioned, one being addressed notably in the next global ecosystem meeting. That's just to give a short notice on that, because Gilles already mentioned the communication issues and solutions. So the big next step, which is kind of already being done, but the main one is the switch from a project approach to more of a settled service. So a dedicated organization has already been set up, as previously INRAE was kind of labeled as responsible, but now the governance is more shared, even if it's still setting up, at least in the name it started. In the same idea to go fast, go alone, go far, go together, the working package are an effective, efficient rather tool to go fast with compartmentalized items for the project part, but they are now have to be harmonized and with more effort being mutualized, even if they're already having big adherences. So it won't be a big problem, but still something that is on the road. The research infrastructure application that I already mentioned, and to foster both good management practices and legitimacy, the culture steel certification. On the technical evolutions, even if the last one could be argued to be regarding technical too, the data registry is still to come, and to come in parallel with other developments being done more and more with this service approach. The migration out of INRAE's infrastructure to shared one with several partners of the project. A very important one on the technical aspect, which is the long-term archiving. And to give the specific INRAE's feedback on this, it's a very interesting aspect on participating on those kinds of initiatives, because INRAE is also working on its archiving policies and the whole archiving reflection of the data. And finally, which has already been mentioned for the repository, sharing the expertise and also the maintenance of the tools with the evolving technologies, not to become obsolete. So here are the link to follow the news, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dimitri, for your presentation. It was very clear and all the explanation. So now we have once again 10 minutes for questions specifically on your presentation, and then we can open the discussion a bit more freely. So we have a question from Joy Davidson. Do you find that organizations participating in the network contribute equally, or are there some that have to take on a heavier workload? So how do you distribute the work?
It kind of depends on which part of the ecosystem you're talking about. It's not equal, but that's also an important thing to integrate, that you can't ask the same thing from 10,000 members institution and a small 200 agents institution. And that's actually one of the strengths, that with the same level of contribution that would be independent, you can still help a lot more small organizations. So it's different, but I think it's one of the strengths too.
Thanks, Dimitri. We have another question from Besem Amira. Can you explain what is the difference between data management stewards and data ambassadors?
It's one of the reasons we don't have yet an English name. The network cover a bit both aspects first, and with it does integrate to specify the list of functions. People that are more on not an administrative levels, but the research, what we call department level, more with the strategic aspect, and that do a bit more stewardship on giving the ground's opinion and the community's feedback for building more data policies and etc. And the more on the ground ambassador, that the ambassador part is more the promoting of the various solutions, practices, etc. Whereas the other is more support. And actually, depending on the profiles, there first those two levels cohabiting, and also various profiles in the network itself, with people being more specialized in DMPs or etc. But working as a network in order to be able to still provide not exactly the same level of services, but bring the knowledge and the services to everyone.
Thanks, Dimitri. And we have one question from Aneta Janowska. Who are the data ambassadors? Are there researchers or administrative staff like librarians who would be trained to be data specialists? Are they like, for instance, working as part of libraries, so independent positions, or are they integrated in the teams?
They are integrated in the teams first, and as for the more profiled, if they're trained to be data specialist or not, it depends. Of course, not the majority, but a lot of them are. But sometimes with a very different aspect of data specialists, being, for example, the domain database specialists, and not the fair aspects, whereas some are most trained on these aspects. So it's very diverse, and that's where the network comes in order to benefit from both very research data approach and more fair and the various aspects. And as mentioned, yes, it's in the laboratories or not nearly in the libraries. People in the libraries, just to give you the INRAE context, work more on central services like the support teams or the trainings usually.
Dimitri. So I think we had the question for your section, and we have another question with for both of you, so Gilles and Dimitri. Once again from Baptiste Cecconi from the Observatoire de Paris. There is a question about the duration of conservation for the data. So how is the curation deletion is managed? So Gilles, I think you're...
Yeah, the duration of conservation, there is no maximum for the time being. There is a minimum guaranteed, which is 5 years, which is minimum, which is doesn't mean this bet about 5 years, but after 5 years, the data are deleted. Of course not, it really depends on the data, on the data sets. In the repository, each data set is assigned a DOI, so there is, well, we enforce the policy of a correspondency between the DOI and the data. So basically, the 5 years is a minimum and there is no maximum. It depends on the, of course, on the data set. Now, the curation deletion, it is handled by the administrators of the different spaces. So for the generic collection, it's the resource center for the repository that deals with the data curation, metadata curation, sorry, not data curation. And for the institutional spaces, each institution that has an institutional repository provides the resources to handle the metadata curation and handle this global administration of the space. So it's handled, it's spread through the different institutions that have their spaces. So does that answer the question?
I think that's just deletion aspect, which is to be addressed within the archiving envelope, because archiving is also selecting which data sets you will preserve on a longer term, and which one you can deaccession with, of course, the metadata always being accessible, and maybe a degraded version being still available with more time.
Thank you for your responses. I think for Baptiste, it seems to be fine in the chat. I don't know if there are more questions about this specific section. I don't see any more in the chat. So it's 11:30, so it's just on time to start the open discussion. You don't need to, you can raise your hand during this time. No need to write your question in the chat, and we can just have an open discussion between the speakers and the participants. I don't know if someone is ready to start, so maybe we can just start with a general question on the methodology and to help the participants to see how it works. I can start with one question about time. How long did it take to develop Recherche Data Gouv? So not the period to implement it, but the preparatory phase. How long for how long it lasts?
I can try to start. It's always hard to determine where it actually starts or where the reflection is still being at a different level, but still contributes to the end result. I think we can trace the real start in 2020 with the constitution of the groups and the planning of the prior surveys to have this service, even if the definition of the repository aspect changed, and it was at that time that it was indicated that the support structure were a necessity in the whole project, not to have just the tool. And it has been from 2020 with these results. The building itself started in 2021, and with the opening being 2022 and still ongoing.
Yeah, thanks, Dimitri. And I will just reinforce again the fact that in this kind of project, just be the technical platform and the whole ecosystem, of course, there needs to be a prefiguration phase and a kind of a pre-thinking of things, but think agile in the way you design things is the most important. So there's no such thing as a 2 years prefiguration phase that stops and then we implement things and it works. I mean, it's just an ongoing process. So in a sense, we are still for some services in the prefiguration phase, because I mean it's just always moving and moving forward. So it's another always evolving process. So.
Thanks, Gilles and Dimitri. So I see that we have a question from Joanne. So Joanne.
Yeah, thanks, Salome, and thanks, Gilles and Dimitri. I found it very interesting what you presented. From my questions earlier, you might realize I'm interested in the gaps, and I wondered, as part of the feasibility study, Gilles, that you were talking about, did you look at what is needed at a disciplinary level that is not yet available? Because it seems what you're building is a generic kind of solution. And what I'm hearing from a lot of researchers in the Dutch landscape is that they are falling in these gaps between these big clusters, and the generic repositories don't provide what they're needing, and they don't fit in with any of these big clusters. And I think there's actually a very large number of these researchers. So I was just wondering if you'd done any as part of the feasibility study, whether it looked at the gaps that exist, and if it did or if it didn't. Do you have any thoughts about when you might be able to look at some of those gaps in the future, and what, I guess we have to internationally then discuss how we divide up the gaps and how we work on those and how we look at those. So how you're engaging internationally in these kind of discussions.
Yeah, so I may have my own answer about that, and then I might let the so Dimitri or complete, because to be honest, I was not there during the feasibility study, so my view might be a bit shifted. But one of the key things is that those gaps were the very starting point from providing Recherche Data Gouv, because the study that has been conducted as of who had solutions showed that 80% of the researchers didn't have. So when we say that we want to provide a solution for those researchers that don't have a solution, it's just not the sort of odd 20%, it's 80% of researchers. So it's a big gap, basically. So that was a very starting point. So providing this solution. Yet it's important to make sure that those who have a solution are not sort of confused by what we put together. So that's why we put as a principle that those who have a solution continue to use this solution, and those who don't come to us. Now, there's a second aspect to that, which is a bit more recent, is the question of reorienting the users that don't know they have a solution, but do have one. And that's the reason why we interlinked with these thematic reference centers. And that's the reason why we want to extend the landscape of the thematic reference centers to make sure that if there is a solution, it is known to us, it is known to the supporters, and then we can reorient the users to that solution. Of course, there are still gaps at the moment, and there are still some data sets that can be published in Recherche Data Gouv that would have been better off somewhere else, or some that, well, the system is not static, and we can readapt that and then relink data that have been published somewhere else and so on. So there's readjustment. But that's also one of the reasons when there was this question about do we stick to the science clusters. I mean, it's probably good to have a structure that match this, but not forget that the scientific clusters are sort of an arbitrary result of some European project that at some point decided that there should be this cluster and this cluster, but then there's a lot of, this is not a discrete repartition, and then there's a lot of scientists in between that don't identify to any of those clusters. So that's why we can, we have to be careful of, feeling this. And feeling the gap is the very reason of the existence of Recherche Data Gouv, basically. So I don't know if Dimitri, if you want to complete, because you've been there.
Yeah, just to add on the survey part, it was actually, it's kind of going back to the how do you define the time, because it was not in the survey, because the survey was already focused at the multidisciplinary, with the idea of not replacing what was existing for the communities. But I think in what has been done after, it's kind of what is trying to address both the local level, not regarding the communities, and another thing I'd like to mention, which is not in Recherche Data Gouv, but is still at national level, which is a trusted repositories list, which of course is going to be more aimed about people that already have a community and a trusted repository. But along with this list is actually published a list of criterion that might help communities to identify other trusted repositories that are not being identified, even if it's already the case with the one in the list. But of course, it's more established communities.
Thank you.
Olivier, I think you anticipate.
Yeah, just wanted to come back to the Recherche Data Gouv as a project, because I think that Dimitri mentioned work packages in his talk, which means that they had probably split the different activities in work packages, and that could be helpful for our colleagues who want to start a similar program in their country. So would you be able to describe the different work packages that you put together?
Yes, of course. I might struggle on the exact names. I didn't prepare a specific slide for it, but there were 5. One being the governance specifically, and the project management. The second one being for what actually hasn't been mentioned in the presentation, because it's kind of serving the various modules, which is the web portal, so the website, which had specific development, and it's a typical example of something which is split in a work package, but should work with the rest just as a technical layer as a service. And the third one is the repository and the registry or catalog. The fourth one, and kind of the same as the website, would merge in a more global service approach, was specifically the technical infrastructure team for both the repository, the portal, etc., in order to have them kind of clustered and centralize the problematics. Oh, thank you for the image.
Yeah, sorry, I realized it's in French. We don't have translated, but then you do
I
it.
think we
You
have
do that
one
very well.
version in English. Thank you. The fifth one is all the mainly what now became the resource center for the repository and catalog, which is trainings, research support, and communication for the services on the ecosystem. And the sixth one is defining, its French is dispositif cible, element for the sustainability of the project as a long-lasting ecosystem and services. For example, the business models, the rules of participation for the organizations, later on the governance model, etc.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. I don't know if there are some more questions, and if not, I have one. Let's say that in the research ecosystem, fair data, sharing data is a synonym to change management, let's say. How did you manage to change the practices among communities, research teams, in order to make them share their data, use fair standards, etc.? How Recherche Data Gouv can help this movement of change? I don't know if it's clear for you.
Well, I mean, there are many things that just join together in this. So there's the well, political impulse that every organization can bring, and it's not just at the national level. So it's not just a ministry thing. It's just like every research organization, every university, so there's this global tendency of providing open science policies and publishing these documents and sort of enforcing the fact that they wanted the political level to open their data, and there is something set to that. So that's the political impulses doesn't do anything by itself, but is very important. So there is this clear sort of message that this is something that is recognized more and more. Then within Recherche Data Gouv, I think this is the network, the fact that we work as a network, which helps sharing the best practices. And between the different data management clusters, which have this geographical scope, they are the one which are the closest to the researchers. They are colleagues to many researchers that come to them because they know them, and that's a very important point. You can have all the policy of the world. If it's something coming top down to you, then you might say, okay, that's good. wording, that's nice, but I don't have time for that. I don't care. I don't, whatever. If you have a colleague next door that just shows you, helps you, accompany you into enforcing those best practices, it's easier. So the local proximity help is very important, but then you have to be careful that this local and proximity help is not left alone, because the problem with being close to the researchers is that you need to share your experience with some other people which are close to other researchers, because you can't be expert in everything. And then that's the network of the data management cluster, which is important here. And we've got they have common and regular meetings together with these working groups that are working on similar issues, and they share expertise and they share experience, and they can sort of ask for help to one another to say, okay, I have a researcher which has this problem, and which, what do I do with them? And then you can have other people answering and so on. So there's a kind of a network of shared help between the trainers and the supporters, which is quite important. Of course, open science can have very different meaning depending on the discipline, or also depending on the local site, because you don't have necessarily the same tools or the same approach or whatever. So this is again combining this specificities of the site and of the discipline with the common best practices which work the most. So there's no one size fits all in this kind of thing. So it's always adapting between what's best for your researcher, the one that you know, by taking the best of other experience that you get around. So working in network is, to my opinion, the best answer to that.
Thank you very much for your response. I don't know if there are other questions in the audience. If not, we can start conclusion of the workshop. If there is no more, and I can start closing the workshop, and if you have any questions just before the end, we can just go back to your question. So I will start again sharing my screen. So just for the, can you see the screen right with the thematic mentors? Yes, okay. So just remember for the selected participants that if you have any questions on this workshop, on this specific thematic, which are French data management clusters, you can contact Marion Massol and Nina Gros from INRAE. They are here today with us. I think you can open your camera if you can. And Olivier Rouchon, also from CNRS, who is here to help you if you have any question on this specific topic following the workshop. So we have already shared the email addresses before. So, and if needed, you can also contact me or Suzanne in order to ask your questions. So, and finally, so today we had our 5th workshop, and the next one and the last thematic workshop will take place on May 14th. So it will be about assessing national current fair enabling capabilities. So it will be our last thematic workshop, and then we will have a peer exchange session in September. So, and just to conclude, Suzanne Dumouchel is sending her apologies for not being here today with us, and she will be there with us soon. So I think that's all. So thank you very much for attending this workshop. If there are no more questions, we can close the meeting, and thank you very much to Will, Dimitri, Olivier, Nina, and Marion for just a specific thank for being here with us and for presenting the topic today. So thank you very much, and see you soon. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, I will leave. Merci beaucoup encore. Bonne
Merci
journée.
pour l'accueil. Bonne journée.
Merci, oui. Bonne journée, au revoir.
Au revoir.